Hi all. I was playing against a super talented 12-year-old kid last night, and I didn't win. He's 151 ECF as well. But to be fair, they must think he's good because they paired him above Tasker, who's 186, and above a couple of other players higher rated. So this was on board 4, playing against Hackney 1. So on boards 1 to 3, Hackney 1 have got John Reed 202 ECF. On board 2, Cassius 188. On board 3, Rob Wilmoth 201. So it's not strictly by grading order, but it seems to be more by perceived strength, current strength. So maybe this is a name to look out for in the future. So I think the kid played really well. So knight f3, knight f6. I played c4 and he played g6. So at first I thought it was going to be asymmetrical for a long while, but he broke the symmetry. He didn't play in this position a6, thankfully. In fact, after the game, he said he didn't really see the point of a3. So I did sort of say, well, rook b1, b4, but it's not that dangerous, I suppose. It's just trying to accumulate a small, tiny positional advantage. Maybe exchange off a flank pawn for a more centre pawn, and get b-file pressure. It's just trying to build up an advantage, and. But anyway, he clamps down quite cleverly on d4, and also on b4 as well by playing a5. The only problem, it sort of weakens b5 a little bit. But I play b3 now, just content that I've weakened b5. I'm playing this rather, not for a massive advantage, because I really thought, well, I'd be able to positionally outplay him. And after e5, I thought, he's weakening the light squares. Perhaps I'll positionally get the better of it later. But I was proved wrong as this game unfolds. After e3, knight e8, I really I played knight b5 with the idea of aiming for d4, but I don't think if d4 happens, it's not that brilliant for white. There are perhaps better ideas in the position. Maybe even here, I was going over it with Ribka, knight d5. This is a variation before I prepared. Because if I do gain that light squared bishop, Acker Steinitz, now I play e4, it's sort of provoking an attack from black, isn't it? f5, f4. But actually the substance of this attack is much less, without the light squared bishop. Apparently, white's fine here, knight d2. If f4, it's not really that scary because he's never going to get in f3 because I've got the light square control, and he's got light square weaknesses. I think white's better there. So knight d5, that would justify knight d5. So maybe knight b5 is a bit poxy compared to knight d5, and he plays knight c7. And really, perhaps I should have also now dynamically just allowed the double pawns, but no, I exchanged off on c7. So any advantage I've got is absolutely minimal now, and I make my position even worse now with d4 because he can do several things here to actually gain an advantage. He can take and then bishop f5 apparently and then a4 and my position is not that brilliant. Pardon me. But what he did do was actually bishop g4, which is okay, and I blundered strategically again. d5 I might have a tiny advantage because I've got a bit of space, extra space, but I take on e5 instead. And after d takes e, I think black is just quite a bit better. So queen e1, and now he goes for the kill with f5. So I'm threatened now with f4. My position is really, really passive. This isn't really what I had in mind from earlier. Knight d2, f4, why not? I was trying to hijack now these lines like diagonals and stuff. So I played e takes f4. Thinking perhaps here that queen e4 might have been good, or something like, threatening queen d5 and queen c5. But I think I'm going to get murdered on the king side. That's the only slight problem. f3 would cause my bishop to be a prisoner on h1, and that sort of thing if I'm not careful. Winning the pawn on c5, that would be the end of my king. So instead, I try and hold the position by this check. And now this f3, so I can try and use f2 if necessary, if you like queen e4 or queen f2 maybe. But I was hoping for bishop h3, but he didn't do that. So bishop f5, hitting the rook, knight e4, But here I was getting a bit more optimistic. My position doesn't look as bad as earlier, but there's still quite intense pressure here from these blasting rooks. Also, black's knight's really good. The bishop's always threatening to take on e4. If the knight can go here, it can threaten to undermine the knight with knight takes f3, which is a tactic which occurred later. So overall, I think black's quite a bit better. King g2, I was optimistically hoping for something along the h file and tactics like knight g5. They don't quite work here because takes, well, rook h1, but there's always king h8, and then if knight f7, you can just take. So knight g5 doesn't quite work. Sorry, in this position, knight g5 doesn't quite work. So in fact, I have just got a passive position, and e4 is being undermined now, even more with my opponent's next move, queen e5. So I'm getting positionally done in. There's just, pardon me, there's just too much dynamic pressure here. All of black's pieces are really good. And so, yeah, I think my opponent has played very nice positionally. Although not very experienced, you know, he's like a bit of a little Casablanca, maybe, you know. He's apparently, he has won the British under-10s when he was like younger, and I think if he plays like this, he's going to be about 170 next season or 180, and probably an IM soon after if he carries on in a few years' time. So queen e3, king g7, rook h1, and he just calmly just plays h5. And I know that, you know, knight f3 is hanging in the air. In fact, on the previous move, I did actually have an opportunity. Perhaps, you know, queen e7 would have been better than this queen e5, because maybe I should have just taken on b7 when I had the chance. And, you know, allow this knight f3 stuff, which happens later. But now that he's protected f8, sorry, knight f3 is really on, undermining e4. Otherwise, there was a loose rook on f8. Let me quickly just explain that. Sorry about that. Okay, in this position, bishop takes b7 doesn't work. Sorry, bishop takes b7 here. Sorry, knight takes f3 doesn't quite work because rook takes, bishop takes. I have bishop e4. And now here, I guess, rook takes f3, I can play king takes f3 to maintain e4. Obviously, I can't play bishop takes f3. So that would be fine. But even in this position, after I play queen e3, if he plays knight takes f3 here, then, you know, rook takes, bishop takes, and his rook's empris here. So bishop takes e4, again, rook f3, king f3, and if queen e4, I can just take on e4, and then take on f8. So his move king g7 is very clever. It's now really supporting, in effect, knight takes f3. So it's building up again for knight takes f3. So queen e3, king g7. Also, it's tactically now unfortunate after my queen e3 that the knight's really pinned to that queen, and I can't really get out of the pin because he's just going to take on f3 anyway now. He's geared up for knight takes f3. So so what I do, I play rook h1, h5, and g4 here. And at least in this position, I can take on h5 at the end of this. So this is what happened. Knight takes f3. Sorry, not knight takes f3 first. Sorry, bishop takes e4. Bishop takes e4. Now knight takes f3. So he's really just simplifying it now into a rook and pawn ending. I think he just simply could have played rook e3. I think he's actually, you know, better, or nearly winning this, in fact. So maybe I was a bit lucky here. He played check and rook b2. So I take on g6, and there's a point now that after taking on b3, king f4, if he carries on munching, I've got rook h7, and then rook takes b7. So he actually munches g6 instead. And after king e5, I actually offer a draw, which he accepts. I thought initially, just quickly after the game, when we were looking at it, that there's maybe a potential for black to go wrong if rook takes rook b1. And here, if rook c3, that wouldn't be ideal because king d5. and if he loses that pawn, I might be just okay, or even tiny little bit better. But in fact, in this position, after this king e5, he can just take and rook b1. I think a good move here is either rook d3 or rook a4. Maybe rook a4 is actually better, hitting the c4 pawn immediately. So if king d5, then there'll be rook b4. So he doesn't need to lose b7. So then he can get this, and then he can start rerouting his king. So that would probably be much better for black. So yeah, it wasn't my greatest game, but on the other hand, the opponent seemed to play quite fluently. It's got to be said. Anyway, please leave any comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.